Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul, and I am a nerd, and you are here for the April, gosh, it's almost 60 out, Tabs3 virtual user group meeting from Attorney Computer Systems, where today we will be talking about changing the language on your bills using the customization options. Mary Jo is going to take that topic. And statement templates. That's what defines how the middle of your bills look, and I'm going to take that topic. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. This right here is your GoToWebinar control panel. So if you're still seeing this on your screen, it's because you have not pressed this little button that looks like an arrow that points to the right, because had you pressed that, your entire control panel would have flown off the right-hand side of your screen and disappeared, and the only thing that you'd see would be these buttons, and they would be hugging the right-hand side of your screen. When that happens, this button does change to look more like an arrow that points to the left, because clicking it again will bring the control panel back onto the screen. Why would you want it back if Paul's just told you how to get rid of it? Well, because you want to ask a question. If you have a question that you would like to ask, the easiest way to ask it is to type it right here. And remember to hit the send button. And when you do that, Patty, our humble moderator, will recognize that you have a question. She will interrupt Mary Jo or myself at just the right time, and she will ask your question for you. Now, if I happen to get off track and go on a tangent and not be answering your question, or maybe Mary Jo's doing a great job of answering a question, but it's slightly different than the question you intended to ask, or perhaps either one of us is doing a great job, but you have follow-up questions, which is usually the case. If any of those things happen, just keep typing those questions here. Keep remembering to hit send, and Patty will make sure that we get your questions answered in a timely fashion and as completely as possible. Now, if you're feeling particularly salty this afternoon, you can press this button that looks like a hand with an arrow pointing upwards in front of it. That means raise your hand. Same thing will happen. Patty will recognize you have a question. She will interrupt Mary Jo or myself at just the right time. But then what she will do is she will unmute your microphone and you can ask your own question. So keep in mind that that unmuted microphone will remain in that state until we are done. So if I get off track or Mary Jo answers a slightly different question than you intended to ask, or any of those things happen, keep talking to us. You have an open line of communication at that point, and we will have a two-way conversation until we are done, and then Patty will mute your microphone back up and you can resume eating the crunchy snacks that I should mention are prohibited while the microphone is open. So without any further ado, I will press all the magic buttons that I need to get into tabs so that Mary Jo can start talking about language and statement customization.
Okay, so we are going to go over to the statement tab and then into statement setup, and then I'm going to click on statement customization. Now, all of the changes that I make in statement customization are global. That's going to affect every single matter that is going to get a statement. We can do some things with templates that Paul's going to talk to you about in a minute, but all of the changes that we make in statement customization to this terminology, to any of the things that you would do here are global. Just keep that in mind. You can't change it for one template or another. It's going to be global. The first screen that we're on is this options tab. These are some settings that you can do that are global, but today we're going to focus on the terminology tab. So right here is how are things going to be defined on the statement? What kind of language do we want to say? And there's some other functions in here too that we're going to talk about. But the first thing, let's talk about what we name things. So sometimes on our statement, we don't want it to say fees. We want it to say professional services rendered or something like that. We may not want it to say balance due. We want it to say balance due or total balance due for all statements or something like that. Any of these kinds of changes, maybe we don't like courtesy discount. We just want it to say discount or professional discount. These are the types of things that we can change in the terminology. And so, for example, the fee example that I had. So here is the fees, and I'm going to double click on that, and it's up here on the top, and we can see where we have a line 9 that we can change, and this could say professional services rendered. Now, I also have some other options here. You can see that it's underlining right now, and that's controlled up here. We also could bold it, so I could take, if I highlight it first, that would help. There we go. So now we can bold that. You could italicize. And then we have some things down here that there's options available. And you're probably going, slash left, slash, L, S, S, B. What does all of this mean? And if you're like me, I'm not one that can memorize a lot of things in my head because I have too much stuff going on in there. So what I do is I will just click on the question mark up here, which is page-specific help. It's going to help me get what does this mean. And I can get a list of what each of those functions mean, except I'm in sample data and I can't get to that. So I will tell you that this is justify left. So if I wanted this all to be justified left, I could go ahead and put the \L in there. I don't need any space there. If I put that there, then everything's going to be justified to the left of my statement. And it will follow whatever margins that you have there. So if you have a ½ inch margin, it's going to justify it over there to the margin on there. The \S, I believe, is the statement date. So you can get that. And again, I'm going to have my mind go blank because I don't have my help. But you have also the \B and the \E. And I'm at a loss at the moment. I can't remember what those are. But those are options for you to do. Once I tab, it's going to go ahead and put that information into line number 9. If I wanted to change this one to discount, again, I may not have quite as many options in here, but any option I have on any line is going to appear down here. Now up here in line 2, you'll notice that there is a little plus sign in front of that. And this is telling me that if I enter a plus sign in the first character position of this line, that attention line to print before the client name will not print. It's not going to be there. So that is another feature that you may have on some of the fields. So every field has some different options. Something else that you might, whoops, let me jump down here a little bit. Something else that you might want to look at, there's some other headings for your different options there. Let me get to line, let me find it. I believe it is line 27, 28. There we go, line 28. So line 28 for total advances. Sometimes we don't want to have a separate section for our expenses and then another section for our advances. Sometimes that can confuse our clients. They just know that you have some expenses you paid for them, or whether it's copies, postage, whatever. They don't need to have that breakdown. Or maybe you're not using that breakdown and you don't want that on your statement. Well, if you change line 28 to an asterisk, that will then combine those two things into your total expenses up at the top. So then it will just have one. So I would encourage you to look through these, go through each of these little options here. You can go ahead and you can select a field, and down below it will give you all of your options that you have for that. And then you can change the language so that it'll appear on your statement exactly how you want it to appear. Okay, so that's where you do that. That's where that is controlled. I encourage you to go ahead and use your yellow question mark. I apologize for not remembering what those two are. I know there's a beginning statement date. I believe that's the \B, and that's going to come from whatever you put in there for your statement date, and then the \E and all of those. And everyone has a different option there.
So you could conceivably say for professional services rendered through \E. Correct. And it would use the ending.
The ending date.
Ending
Thank you.
date.
That's it. The ending date.
In fact, I think on many of our clients we see for professional services rendered from, and then they have the \E through \E, and it just puts in whatever the cutoff dates are for the transaction. So.
Yeah, and that is a cutoff date that you use on the statement when you run those. So if you have the \ending date, it's not going to give you the last date. Trying to think of how I want to say that.
It's not the statement date, but it's the ending cutoff date.
Yeah, and it's even then it has to be whatever that ending date is there. It's not going to be the last date through the billing period. It's going to be whatever.
Whatever you put.
Yeah, whatever you put in there.
Right.
So you have to be careful with what you're asking it to do there.
Exactly. So there's a lot of hidden gems in here. It's kind of deceptive that they call this the terminology tab, because it's also where you go to combine expenses and advances into one thing. Mm-hmm. And there's probably a couple of other of these little things. It's where you go to tell it to include the attention line before the company name. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of little hidden gems in there that people would not think of terminology when they thought of where to go to look for it. So it's always kind of a neat idea to come in here and understand what your options are.
Now I'm going to cancel out of that and not save that for you, Paul, but you can go into your...
And I'm going to take you into another part of statement setup, and this is called the templates. Now, just to understand, there are many elements in a bill. And so the statement designer controls what appears at the top and bottom. The statement templates control the detail that's shown in the middle. What's shown for fees, what's shown for expenses, what's shown for advances. We're going to look at that in a second. The statement customization includes the terminology. So you put all these things together and you really have a lot of control over exactly how your statements look, a lot more so than people think. So let's take a deeper dive into the statement templates. I'm going to pull up the draft template that every system comes with, and you'll see that it's full detail used for draft statements as the description. These tabs dictate how much detail is shown in the middle of the bill. So just to give you a real quick understanding of what I mean by that, if I go and just generate statements and just get a couple up on the screen that we can refer to. And I'm going to get down. So this part here is controlled by the statement layout. Anything that you'd have at the bottom, in this example, it's a credit card remittance form, is controlled by the statement layout. We already talked about change. In fact, Mary Jo showed you how to change fees, the word fees, to read for professional services rendered or whatever she put there. So that's the terminology. What I'm talking about is the middle, the detail, if you will. So if I take you back into the template manager, these two tabs here, fee format and cost payment format, they will determine exactly what we see for the detail. Let's start with the cost payment because it's a little simpler. For expenses, do we want to just show the standard listing? Do we want to include transaction code detail with a subtotal? Do you want transaction code subtotal only? Or do you want a summary? Or do you just plain not want to show expenses? Same thing for advances. You have those four options, or then no advances. And then for payment, do you want detail, totals only, or totals by date? We used to see a lot of people using totals only. We see now mainly people using detail. So it's either going to list every payment separate, it's going to total them all together into total payments received, or it's going to say total payments received on this date, total payments received on that date, and then have a total for those payments. Layouts, just so you understand, merely tells it which layout to use when this template is used. Remember, I took you into the layout designer just a second ago and showed you that that controls how the bottom and the top of the bill look, usually the letterhead, and a lot of times the credit card remittance form at the bottom. So you design those, and you can have many of them. You could conceivably have 4 individual attorneys all operating their own practices but sharing a billing system. And they could have Bob's statement layout that has his letterhead, and George's statement layout that has his letterhead, and Sandra's statement layout that has her letterhead, etc. And this is just telling it when this template is used, which of those statement layouts should be used for the different elements, the page 1, page 2 envelope, and then the cover statement. So we're not going to get into the layouts, but this is where you define which of those layouts that you've already done is going to be used when this template is used. And then we have fee format. Got a little more detail here. You've got standard, which just bills your fees. You've got info only, which shows your fees, but doesn't consider them to have been billed that period. Who would use that? Contingent firms, plaintiffs firms. If you're going to list all the good stuff you're doing, and then next month you're going to list more good stuff, but still list the stuff you listed before, and that bill's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, you're going to use an info-only format. You want to show them what you're doing, but you're not really billing for it. So an info-only format is appropriate there. You've got a summary, which is basically just a way to tell it, hey, I know there's going to be fees, but I'm going to dictate a paragraph that's going to supersede that. And although it's going to know that these 12 things went into this 7 hours for a total of $1,400, that's going to be there in the background because this summary paragraph is going to replace that. Or no fees. Sometimes contingent firms don't even show fees. They don't even keep track of fees. Maybe occasionally they do, sometimes they don't. So no fees would say, hey, don't show the fees. We're just going to show the expenses and advances. Fee recap. At the bottom of the fee section, you can recapitulate your fees in one of these three ways: by timekeeper, by timekeeper level, or by rate. So what that does is it may list 47 fee transactions, and then at the bottom say Bob had this many hours for this total, and Joe had this many hours for this total.
And just to add in the recapitulation, so what client really will know what that means, right? So that's one of the things you can change in the terminology
Exactly.
to say timekeeper summary, something that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
So that's how it ties in.
Good tie-in, Mary Jo. So yeah, you can use what Mary Jo showed you to change that so it doesn't say recapitulation, because although I like to say it, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So you can recapitulate by timekeeper or by level. Instead of by timekeeper, it might be partners, this many hours at this much, or associates, this many hours and that much, or by rate. We don't see that happen very often, but sometimes you'll want to show that somebody worked at 2 different rates. Some of my insurance defense firms, when they have a quarterly statement that spans a period where the rate was lower for one timekeeper in one month and a little bit higher in the next month because of a negotiated rate increase, they might use that rate recap to show, yes, we billed this much at this rate, and then we raised the rate because we were allowed to, and we billed that much at that rate. Do we want to show hours? Do we want to show the level description, partner, associate, paralegal? Do we want to show the total? And when we do this, do we want to show the calculated rate, the average hourly rate, no rate, or a transaction rate? So there are different rates that can appear in the detail of the statement depending on which of these you choose. And then basically you're also saying, do you or do you not want the date, the timekeeper initials, the description, the rate, and then there's a place at the bottom where it'll total non-billable hours. Do you want that to show? Hours, are they going to be detail, totals only, or no hours? Meaning that if we choose to show hours, which we do here, do we want to show hours for each individual transaction or just a total at the bottom? Do you want to show for amount detail, in meaning an amount for each individual transaction, or just subtotals and totals? You might be grouping by timekeeper, for instance. We'll talk about that in a second, or just the totals. So do you want the amount to show? We're in amount right now. Same for hours. Do you want the hours or amount to show for every transaction, just for the totals and subtotals, or just for the totals alone, even if there are subtotals? Paragraph is kind of an interesting one. My father was a patent attorney, and he's who got me into this business, and he used to do what we would call paragraph bills. He would take all the different transactions and lump them into one long paragraph. Not to be confused with a summary that gets dictated at the end, but just taking them and separating them with semicolons and putting them all together and having a big long description that includes all the transactions. That's what he would get if he said total paragraph. You can also break it down by date or by date and timekeeper. So you could say, well, on this date, we did 4 things, and here they all are. Not listed separately, but just lumped together in a paragraph. Or you can even do it by date and timekeeper. So that's what we're talking about there. And then finally, I'm going to jump back to the first screen, even though I started here. What type of a statement will this be? Statement or invoice format? A statement is going to show previous balances and payments and credits. An invoice format is only going to show you what's been done during that billing period. So it doesn't take previous balance or any payments into account. It just says, for this period, this is what we did and this is how much you owe. So if most people will choose statement, a lot of times insurance defense firms will choose invoice. Do you want to show a billing history? And if so, do you want it to include hours or just amount or not at all? Do you want a past due message? And if so, do you want detail, which is going to be one of those messages that Mary Jo just showed you? We kind of skipped right by them, but there was, your account is 30 days past due, your account is 60 days past due. Do you want to show an aged past due message? I'm sorry, that's the one that breaks it down that way. A summary past due message or no past due message. Do you want to include statement notes for each file on combined statements? That there is an option to combine multiple matters into one. And if so, do you want the statement notes to show for each file, each matter, or just once? And include statement notes for a cover statement. That's pretty self-explanatory. There are notes that can be included, and you define these notes. We have a couple. We have one on our finance charge and one on payments received after a certain date. The statement date are not included. Here's an example of using that /S that Mary Jo talked about, only we're using it someplace else. We're not using it in the statement terminology. We're using it in a statement note. So in this note, for instance, we're saying payments received after whatever are not going to be shown. And finally, down at the bottom, if this is a draft, do you want it to be used as the default draft template? If it's a final template, do you want it to be used as the default final template? Do you want to have page breaks and transaction descriptions? Depends on how wordy your attorneys are. If they have very long descriptions, you may not want it to two-thirds of the way down, go to the next page just because there's a half-page long transaction. So sometimes this is appropriate, sometimes it's not. Sometimes firms say, oh no, we're always very brief, so please don't break it in the middle. And print statement comments on draft statements, just whether or not they're going to show up on the drafts or just on the finals. Now, don't be confused by the fact that this is called draft. You call them whatever you want. So the system comes out of the box with a default draft statement and a default final statement. And people can usually create these templates. I'd have to say that most of the time it falls along area of practice sort of boundaries. For our criminal matters, we need to show more detail. So we're going to include hours and amount and initials and description and rate. We include everything. Whereas for our probate matters or our estate planning matters, we're just going to show we did this, 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 and this, so just description and a total hours, total amount. So you can have as many of these statement templates as you want, and they are assigned on a matter-by-matter basis. Now, again, we've identified that this is the default for drafts and this is default for finals. So any new matter that gets open is going to have this default for drafts and this default for finals, but you could change it to anything.
And sometimes you might even have a specific client that needs to have a certain template for all of their matters, or sometimes for the electronically submitted bills for leads, for example, they need a specific format. So that's, again, another place you
Another example, yeah. And as you can guess by the descriptions here, there is a place to have, for each matter, when you set it up, there's a place to have the draft statement template and the final statement template. Now, I typically find that the clients I work with want their attorneys to review a bill that's going to look exactly like what the client's going to see. So typically, there is a template that gets used in both places for all matters. But sometimes you'll have differences. Sometimes attorneys will say, well, we're not going to bother our clients with the age of their past due balances until they get to a certain point. So we don't show that aging breakdown at the bottom, but we want to see it when we review the bills. Another example is the billing history. Sometimes the attorneys want to see what the billing history was when they review draft bills, but they don't want the clients to see, oh, I've already paid you $150,000 for this matter, so they leave that off of there. So there are subtle differences where you might want to have a draft statement that looks just slightly different than a final statement, and of course, as you can see here, that's achievable. That's something that we can do by having different draft and final templates. And that is that. I forgot at the beginning to mention two things, so I'm going to be very emphatic in mentioning them now, but not before I tell you that next month we're going to talk about the support log. Tabs is keeping track of what you're doing in the support log. And it's called the support log because support uses it, but you might be able to use it too. So Mary Jo is going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about how to make sure you've got a local install. And if you're thinking, well, what's a local install? Well, it's one that doesn't say you can't have help when you pull up help. That is why Mary Jo and I always get that message about not having help available when we pull it up, because we're not running off a local install. And so we're going to explain what that means. I am, to be exact, and I'm going to explain how to do that. Now, we want people to know two things. Version 16 is being sunsetted in June. So this is the second to last month that I'm going to warn you of this. If you are on version 16 and you either are entitled to or are not entitled to an update, doesn't matter, you should consider updating your software. A lot of people will stay on a version even though they've got maintenance, even though they're entitled to free updates. They just stay on it because it's what they know. And so we are going to be sunsetting version 16 in June, and that means you won't be able to get support for it anymore. And it means as we go farther and farther away from that date when it was sunsetted, it's going to be harder and harder to update it from that version without jumping through some extra hoops. So keep that in mind. And I'm not going to tell you the other thing I was going to tell you before that I'm going to emphatically mention now, because Patty tells me that in the meantime we've got a question. So we'll take the question first. Patty?
Paul, Michelle would like to know if you can copy a statement format and save it as an invoice format.
Yes, and I'm glad she asked that. Thank you, Michelle, because I forgot to tell you that if you pull up something like this and then simply go back here, what is it, Mary Jo? You hit escape first? You just go back here, you just highlight that name, and you give it a new name. I'm going to call it temp. And you'll notice that nothing changed except the description blanked out. So I'm going to put temp template, template. I'm funny. I laugh at my own jokes. Temp and temp template. And what I've just done, once I save it, is I've created a brand new template with a different name, different description, and then all I would have to do is change to invoice format. So yes, if you pull up the one that is currently statement format, go to the template ID field, block it, and give it a new name and give it a new description and change it to invoice format, you will have effectively done just that. Now, that's not the only reason to use this functionality. You can pull up one that's very close to what you want, but you just want to change a few things. Give it the new name, give it the new description, change the few things and save it, and you've effectively done that without having to remember how to set everything else. I used to make notes of everything that was on every tab before this function was available, or perhaps after it was available and I just didn't know it was there. And then I'd go in and recreate everything. You don't have to do that. You just pull it up, change the name, put in the new description, and make your changes to just what you want to change. So the other thing that's very cool that needs to be emphasized right now is that version 19 is coming, and it probably will be here in about 2 months. We are currently in a pre-release state for ourselves. We are running version 19 of Tabs, Practice Master, APGL, and Trust. And our clients that have signed up to be on the pre-release program will be getting theirs probably this week or next. So if you're interested in what version 19 looks like and you're willing to make comments on things that you find that you'd like to change, or maybe you want to make comments on things that you find that you might change or do differently, then the pre-release program is for you. All you have to do is send me an email, paul.purdue@attorneycomputersystems.com, and I believe that comes up at the end of the video if you're watching a video. Paul.purdue, like the school, not the chicken, P-U-R-D-U-E, paul.purdue@attorneycomputersystems.com. You can also, if you've registered and we're watching this live, you can just reply to that email that you got with the sign up in with the login information for the webinar, and that'll get to me too. Just let us know you'd like to at least explore being on the pre-release. That will prompt me or somebody here to send you a list of what's new so you can kind of check it out and get you set up to do that if you want. Pre-release is basically just playing with it for a couple months before everybody else gets to. There's some neat stuff in there. I won't even go into it because that's what we're going to talk about in 2 months. So if you're interested, let me know, and we will get that list to you so you can study it, and then if you want, we'll get you signed up to be a pre-release candidate. And that is it. The last thing I always do is, as our veteran listeners will know, is that I go to attorneycomputersystems.com. Notice my emphasis on that last S in the word systems. And that's where you'll find all of our video content. So if I go there and either hover over the word videos or click on the word videos, I will get a list of every video that we have, including our live events and our not so live events, our pre-recorded events, pre-recorded videos. So this will take you to a listing of everything, and the first 4 items are our live events. We have 3 virtual user group meetings. You are currently in the Tabs virtual user group meeting. We also have one for Practice Master and one for World Docs. And I also put on a live coffee pot webinar every month where we invite somebody in from a company that has a really neat thing that is an add-on or enhancement to Tabs or Practice Master or World Docs, and get them to tell us about that and talk to us about how much it costs and how they can get it. And then we also have our pre-recorded titles. We have Mary Jo's eBytes video series and the longer format Paul and Mary Jo show. Mary Jo records 3 of these every month, one on Tabs, one on Practice Master, one on World Docs. They're little 2, 3, 4-minute videos where we explain, or where she explains something really cool that can be explained very concisely and very quickly, hence the name eBytes. And then for things that are broader and more expansive in nature, we have the Paul and Mary Jo show, where we do the same thing. We pick something neat to tell about, but we take a deeper dive at 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes to get into all the various nooks and crannies of whatever it is we're talking about that day. If you click on the more info for any of these, I'll go into Tabs, you'll find that you get a very brief description of what the event is. This is the Tabs3 virtual user group meeting, so here's a description of what that is. You'll find information on the next event. This is our May with the topics that we just laid out. You'll find 2 links to register if it's not a pre-recorded event. Same place, same links. Some people just like to see what they're clicking on before they click on it. And then a description of what that particular session is about. As you scroll down, you will find pre-recorded versions of everything else we've done, except the one you're currently listening to, because, well, if you're listening to it on Monday, the 30th of April in 2018, then you're listening to it live. And so this one's currently in post-production. It'll be out in about a week or so. But as you scroll down, you'll find a recorded version of every one we've done before. We have somewhere between 600 and 800 videos on our website. So there's a lot of content. You can browse through it in that way. You can just go from one title to another, or you can search for something. If you wanted to find about emailing statements, I'm willing to bet that if we type the word email in and hit enter, or even just go with one of the hits on the shorter list that pops up, one of the things we would find out about is how to email statements. So those are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So please take advantage of them. They're there for you. Everybody have a good rest of the day, and we will see you in May. Thanks. Bye.